So now for our next speaker is Rob White. And Rob has a story about an assignment that he was given and how it made him see the border in a different way. Rob.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me without the microphone?
Wait, you need to use the microphone so that the
For the
camera
camera guys?
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks,
Good
Rob.
evening.
Thanks.
I tried. Good evening. My name is Rob. I consider myself kind of an average guy, but I've done some pretty unique things in my life. One of the things I did started back in 2006. In 2006, I found myself standing on a sand dune. It was about 115 degrees outside. I was looking south, and I was talking to Border Patrol agents, and what they told me was they needed my help stopping the flow. What the Border Patrol guys explained to me was that they were in the Yuma sector. It was only about 126 miles of the border. But in the Yuma sector between January and May of every year, they were averaging about 5,000 illegal crossers a week. They also told me that about 70% of all the marijuana consumed in the United States was coming through Arizona as it went to the rest of the nation. I remember standing there looking south, and I remember thinking to myself, if the problems are this bad here, why are we waiting this long to actually address this issue? Well, to give you some background about myself so you understand who I am, at that time I was a lieutenant colonel in the Arizona National Guard. About 6 months earlier, I had just gotten back from a deployment to Iraq where I spent a year. While I was in Iraq, I was in charge of force protection for 2 bases in northern Iraq. I was responsible for security for about 10,000 people. And so, as I stood there looking, I was like, okay, this is something that we can handle. So I got together a group of about 800 men and women, and we were told we had about 2.5 years to build about as much fence as we could. So how did we go at this problem? Well, one of the first things we did was I looked at the Arizona border. And if you have not been down on the Arizona border, I'm here to tell you it is very beautiful. Okay, you start out in the west in Yuma. Yuma is flat, it's sandy, and it is hot. Believe it or not, it can be hotter in Yuma than it is here during the summertime. As you move to the east, you come across the Tahanas Altus Mountains. It's a very large mountain range that runs from deep in Mexico to deep into Arizona. After you pass the Tahanas Altus, you come to the Cabeza Prieta and the Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument. These areas are very remote. They're about 40 miles out from the nearest town. In fact, they are so remote, when I was out there, that I was shown a stagecoach building that was still standing. And you could see the ruts in the rock from the wheels of the stagecoach. So as you go east from there, you come to the Tohono O'odham Nation. The Tone goes from about 20 miles in Mexico to about 50 miles into Arizona, and it is rugged with multiple mountain ranges. There are areas on the Tone that you cannot get to with a 4-wheel drive vehicle. It would take you a day to walk to these areas. As you leave the Tone, you start to move into the populated areas, starting with Nogales and going all the way to Douglas. In between Nogales and Douglas, it's rolling hills. It's a very beautiful, like, prairie area. In fact, during the 50s and 60s, many Westerns were made down there. My hero, John Wayne, made several of his top movies in that area. When you leave Douglas and you go further east, you go back into very rugged terrain until you cross into New Mexico. The reason why I tell you this is because if you hear a politician or you hear somebody say, I can build a fence from the Pacific to the Gulf, they either don't know what they're talking about or they're just playing politics with you, okay? It's rugged. Now, okay, how did we build, what did we build, okay? What we built was, the number one thing we built was vehicle barrier. It was steel pipe about this big around. We drove it 5 feet into the ground, It ranged in 3 feet to 5 feet in height, 3 feet apart, filled with concrete. We built about 60 miles of that. Our goal was to keep out cars. We weren't really working on people. In the cities, we did build pedestrian fence in some areas. That was made out of steel sheets, steel plating, or it was recycled World War II aircraft landing mat that we welded to vertical posts sunk into the ground. This went up 15, 20 feet depending on what was needed, and it was solid. Down on the border, there was a saying, if you build a 10-foot fence, the people are gonna build a 15-foot ladder. So you can kind of see, there's only so much you can do with the pedestrian fence, okay? But there was one day, I'm down in Nogales, and I'm watching my crew, and they're putting up a pole, and it's gonna have lights and cameras on it. And we were putting that up because they had just finished, another crew had finished building a nice section of pedestrian fence. And so I'm standing at this fence and I'm looking at this fence, admiring, the quality that the military soldier can make and produce. And as I'm looking at the fence, I noticed that a section of it moved. And I thought, that's not right. And before I could really say anything, a 4-foot by 4-foot section of the fence rotated open like a secret door, and 10 to 15 people came running through. And I just kind of stood there. And I was like, wow. And so these people scattered, and four men came running right by me. And as they ran by me, I looked at them and I went, they're not Mexican. They're not from anywhere south of here. They're Persian. And so I was like, wow. Well, the Border Patrol had been watching this group, and they were able to catch all of them. And what I found out later on from the Border Patrol was that these 4 men said they were from Iran, but they had counterfeit documents on them. Now, I don't know if they were terrorists. I don't know if they were refugees. They may have been refugees. But what I do know is these were the kind of people that our government needs to be aware of who's here, okay? I spent almost my entire career as a police or army officer working to protect my country, my community, and my family, and keep them safe. I believe that we have to get control over how people enter this country everywhere, not just on the border. With my 2.5 years experience of building the fence down on the border, I can tell you a fence will not keep everyone out. And that's not what we intended it to do. When we built it, we did not intend it to stop everyone. We intended to stop cars. So a fence to me is just a tool that we can use to get control so that we can keep track of who's here and why. And to me, that's an important issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob, for your story. Rob, as he mentioned, is an Army veteran who now works in an air-conditioned office.
He didn't include this part in his story, so I'm going to tell it to you briefly because it blew my mind, but he did mention this one time that they could see on their security cameras that at night there had been all these flashes and arcs and sparks, and they could not quite see what was happening because the people stayed just out of sight of the camera, but they knew something was happening down where they had built some big, how do you pronounce them? Bollards. Those giant round things that keep cars from hitting buildings. But these keep cars from moving through the desert. So he says they go out there the next day, and they're looking at them, and they're trying to figure out what must have been happening here the night before, and they're not quite sure. And then Rob or somebody sees that one doesn't really look right, and they touch it, and they had replaced all of them with paper mache. And I was like, oh my God, Rob. But he didn't have that wasn't tight narrative because he did a beautiful job. But in the back of my head, I was just like, God, these are the kind of crafty people though that everybody could. This is MacGyver stuff down there. Robbie's a great storyteller, and he has 1,000 stories that we wouldn't let him tell on our stage tonight, just like those. So buy him a beer, say hi to him. He has a lot more where that came from. Thank you so much for sharing those insights with us.